Hi there. It's June the 4th, and in our progress through the book of 2 Samuel, we're coming towards an end of David's life, and we're looking at chapters 22 and 23. Chapter 22 is a psalm of David, and it isn't from this particular time, the time towards the end of his reign, but it's actually from earlier in his reign, or is earlier in his life, when he is delivered from the pursuit of Saul. We also find the words of chapter 22 in Psalm 18, and it's a psalm that really focuses in on the victories of David, on the way that David has lived his life, but more than anything it highlights the nature of God as his rock and as his strength, that God has been the source of his life. And so we find words in here such as, who is God like our Lord? Who is the rock beside our God? We find words in there like, the Lord lives, blessed be my rock, and the rock of my salvation be exalted. Words that come from David's heart because he knows that he could only have got through these things with God's help. And then into chapter 23 we find another psalm which is called the last words of David. They probably aren't the last words of David in the sense of his deathbed speech, but they are possibly the last official, the last formal psalm that David gave to the musicians. And again, they are redolent of God's protection and God's aid and God's help. And then at the end of our reading in chapter 23 comes a list of the mighty men of valor, kind of parade of heroes, of names of people that David has relied upon in his military command. And we find their names like Abishai, we find their names like Benaiah, who fought a lion in a pit on a snowy day. And particularly there's a beautiful story of three unnamed men who come down. They're part of a group of 30, the 30 mighty men, and they come to David when he's in the cave of Adullam. And at that time the Philistines have taken Bethlehem, or at least they have a garrison at Bethlehem, and as David is in his fastness, as he's in his cave, it's probably a hot day and David is dehydrated, and he says, oh, I wish I could have a drink from the well of Bethlehem. And three of these men go and they break through the Philistine garrisons, and they get a drink of water and they bring it back to David. But when David gets the drink of water, he says, there's no way I can drink this. This is equivalent to these men's blood. They've risked their lives to get this. And he pours out the water before the Lord as a drink offering. It's a beautiful story of David's acknowledgement of how people serve him, and he's not grabbing, he's actually always keeping the Lord in his perspective. In our day-to-day lives, we need to see that every event in our lives has significance in terms of God's effect on us, in terms of God's leading of our lives. And just like David, we need to constantly keep him in view as being the rock of our rescue, the rock of our salvation. Have a very good June the 4th.